Okay, so the next deck we're going to work on is Dwarves. So, Dwarves have a very unique playstyle. First and foremost, their entire deck is designed on a tempo-based strategy. They're going to make sure that everything that they play either returns a card to hand, so what we refer to as bouncing a card, or they're all about sculpting the way their top deck is to make sure that they have everything they possibly can to not only stop your opponent from playing cards, having ample amount of negates, but also just making sure that they can flip warriors off the top of their deck into play. And we'll show you how we do that. So first off, we start off with the Warlord. So, Quartzheart is the only Warlord available right now for Dwarves. But Quartzheart, the Arcane Rune Master, has a health of 70, but he fits right into the deck strategy perfectly. First and foremost, he has his Cast the Runes ability, which is a cooldown of 4 turns and a Bloodborne of 2. So you'll notice the thing in Dwarves is the fact that they have to pay some pretty steep Bloodborne costs, so you really have to manage the resources, the health of Quartzheart, much like the Orc deck. So his ability to look at the top 5 cards of your deck, rearrange them in any order you want, and then put it back and draw a card. So this is huge when you want to set up those awesome into the Blastforge plays to be able to flip guys into play, but also really sculpt your next 5 turns to be really valuable when you need them. This whole deck is pre-planning against your opponent, and knowing the play lines of your opponent's deck is definitely more important than knowing the play lines of your own, because ultimately this deck is going to try and out-tempo your opponent. Outside of that, he has a straight physical attack of 4, so that becomes relevant when we look at the Guardian Rayleigh, because he can still put out some damage to be able to destroy something, and Raylein's going to allow you to help resculpt the top of your deck, so fitting with the Dwarf strategy. But also is the fact that his magical attack doesn't actually do any damage. It targets a warrior on the field and returns the targeted warrior to the owner's hand. So what makes this so good is the fact that not only can it return your opponent's warrior when you're trying to push for some extra damage, or to just try and lock them out of playing their 1 conscript for the turn, or you can just use it to bounce your own warrior to come back into play to get you those enter play abilities. And we're going to talk about that some more. But keep in mind, this is just like our other deck text, this is going to be the budget strategy of the deck, so it won't include the Exalteds. So that's crucial because Dwarves are a deck that thrives off of its Exalted, Kindlehost, the Blastforge Firesparker. But we built the deck right now just to show you the deck without Kindlehost. So next, we just go down to the Veil. So this is the Veil that comes in the starter deck, just like all the other ones, and it's the only ones that are currently available in the game. Starts with a Veil counter of 3, same thing. So at the end of 3 turns, this flips. And when it flips, it reveals the Frost Realm. This is the home of where the Dwarves come from. Land of a lot of snow, mountains, forged gemstones, things like that. And the Frost Realm has an effect that, just like the other ones, is an absolute effect. You target 2 cards on the field, return them to their respective owner's hand. Much like the strategy we want to do. Next, we're going to use the synergy from Ravage Lands. Compared to the last 2 deck texts that we did, this one here is almost a necessity in the deck. Mount Fingar, the Frozen Peak. So, yes, we're saying this is a budget build, but right now Fingar is pretty relatively available, and it is the lowest cost of all of the renowns in the game. So, pretty easy and affordable to pick up as of right now. So this has a cooldown of 6 compared to the starting ones that only have a cooldown of 5 turns, but that's okay because realistically, the turn you activate this is the turn you're going to try and push for big damage. Outside of that, it targets 2 cards in the field, returns them to respective owner's hand. So once again, fitting the theme of the Frost Realm returning 2, Quartzheart being able to return 2, or return 1, and this being able to return 2. So you're going to be able to clear boards and really trying to lock your opponent out of playing cards. Also, this is going to manifest 2 Frost Wolves to your side of the field, and the Frost Wolves are crucial because these Frost Wolf tokens, they're 1 attack, but they have this awesome keyword of Frostbite. Now this is a keyword that's only available in the Dwarf deck, and whenever your Frostbite warrior battles a warrior, that warrior's attack is half rounded down. So what I mean by that is these are your Frost Wolves. So not only do they look super awesome, but this Frostbite ability, when they battle a warrior with 2 power, it becomes a 1. When they battle a warrior with 4 power, it becomes a 2. A 5 power even becomes a 2. But if you battle a warrior with 1 power, it actually kills the warrior. So that's what's awesome about this, is when a lot of people play those 1-power warriors with really cool keyword abilities, the Frost Wolves can just go through them without them dying. So that's pretty awesome. But ultimately, they can trade with anything that is 3 power or less, which is really cool for removing problem things. And that's how you get that through Mount Fingar. So then, moving on to the Guardian. Rayleigh, the Gatekeeper on Fingar's Peak. Oh, right there, Fingar's Peak. So, Rayleigh is the only Guardian available in the game right now for Dwarfs. She's also renowned, but she's also one of the cheaper renowns in the game. And her AP is 50, just like the other Guardians. And after the mulligan of the game, you actually get to choose one card in any player's hand, and they have to put that card on the bottom of the deck. So that's really awesome, because she, once again, just really tries to slow your opponent down and fits into the theme of the deck. Speaking of fitting into the theme of the deck, her consume ability, like I said about stacking the deck with Quartz Heart, her consume ability is if your Dwarf Warlord destroys at least one warrior by battle, you can target 2 Dwarf cards in your discard pile and put them back on top of your deck. And that's any 2 Dwarf cards. You can put Warriors there if you really want to try and fuel your Into the Blastforge, or you can put some Dwarf Negate cards up there on top of your deck to be able to really solidify your next couple turns while you're trying to manage the game and push for more damage later on. So then moving on to the Warriors. We're actually going to do the Warriors first with Dwarves, because this is really crucial in the deck, is the fact that the Warrior count is integral to make sure that the Into the Blastforge style of play really works. So starting with the Warriors, we're going to start with Gillar, the Blastforge Inspector. So he's the one that comes in the 2-player starter set, and you have all 3 of them here. He has Plunder, which we've talked about before in a previous video, but Plunder allows the opponent, you offer the deck to your opponent to cut, they cut it, and you draw from where that card was cut to. So that's really awesome, because Plunder is a great mechanic to keep your hand advantage in a tempo-based deck when you're trying to stop your opponent from playing cards. Then, speaking of Plunder, we're going to move on to the other Plunder Warrior that Dwarves get, Dalgo the Blastforge Tunnel Digger. So, once again, just a straight Plunder, he comes from the 2-player starter set. So right away, you got 6 Warriors in your deck that have Plunder. Just an excellent way to keep and maintain your hand advantage in Dwarves. Next we have Storala, who is a 3-of in the deck, and she also comes from the 2-player starter set. So she has that really powerful mechanic of Retrieve. Now she can target any unified or fortified card in your discard pile that's a Dwarf card, and add it back to the hand, which is awesome, because once again, if we didn't stack the cards on the top of our deck, we've already used some negates or used some cards that return cards to the hand, and this really allows us to solidify those late game pushes or early game advantages when we're returning cards to their hand, and then we're adding back the cards that we used to do that to try and do it again. Next, we run 3 Franz. Franz, the Blastforge Geyser Blaster. So he's a common that comes from Ravaged Lands, so he's readily available for everybody. He's a 1-attack power warrior, and he has the ability of Gust. And Gust is when he enters play, you target 1 warrior on the field, return the targeted warrior to the owner's hand. Well, conveniently going with all of our Dwarf themes of returning cards to hand. We just don't want our opponents to have anything on the field, and we want them to continue to have to play, different style of play than what they're used to. Next, we have 3 Quantamine, the Blastforge Elder Druid. Not only does his art look super cool with that little steampunk owl, but also the fact that he's a 1-power warrior from Ravaged Lands, also a common, so readily available for everybody. And this warrior has Wisdom. So Wisdom's the play when you put into play, you look at the top 2 cards of your deck, add 1 to hand and 1 goes to the bottom. So another way of really crafting and sculpting your deck, and when you've already re-sculpted some cards on the top of your deck and you want to get that more advantage, you can really benefit from Wisdom because you put and re-sculpted things, maybe with Rayleigh's effect or with Quartz Heart's effect, and maybe it was a card you didn't really want there in the 2nd position. You can add 1 to hand, put it to the bottom, and now you kind of know what your next cards are coming to be. Next, we run 2 Quiddex, the Blastforge Honorbringer. And Quiddex is a card that's available in the 2-player battle decks. Now, he only comes as 1 in the deck, but for this build, we want to make sure we have 2, because he's a 5 power Blastforge warrior, and that's key. Because dwarves need to be able to push a bunch of damage when they can after they've cleared their opponent's board with all of their awesome return to hand effects. Speaking of 5 power push for damage, another Blastforge 5 power, Hilbrand the Blastforge Blacksmith. So he comes from Ravage Lands, and he's an uncommon, so he's still pretty easy to get. And he's just a straight up 5 power Blastforge warrior. Just like your Quidex, it really helps push for damage. So as you can see by our lineup here, all warriors that are available right now in this deck are all Blastforge warriors. Now you want to keep that in mind, because that's going to be really crucial as we move forward with other Blastforge effects. So next we have Keltor's Explosive Kit. So this is a unified card, and this comes from the 2-player battle decks as well. And Keltor's Explosive Kit, you pay 6 life and search your deck for any Blastforge card. Now yeah, you can search for any warrior you need, but mainly you're going to be searching for your unified and fortified cards here. Particularly, a great card that's going to combo with this is that you're going to try and get your into the Blastforge. This gives you an extra copy in the deck, and that's really your engine that starts this deck going. Outside of that, if it's in the discard pile, you can pay 8 life to eradicate this card, target 1 Blastforge card in your discard pile, and 1 other card in the field. You get to add that Blastforge card from your discard pile back to your hand, and then you get to destroy a card in the field. So the life cost for this is pretty steep, but what's ultimately great about this is the fact that you get to recycle your Blastforge cards. So it could be a warrior, but most oftentimes it's going to be that unified and fortified card, which is going to be really crucial for your strategy. And he gets to destroy a card. So the life loss for that is pretty worth it and pretty balanced out. You can gain both effects in the same turn, so you want to keep in mind with that. Next is Diary of a Blastforge Survivor. So this comes in our 2-player starter set as well. And what makes this card so great is the fact that not only can you play multiple of it in a turn, but its Bloodborne cost is only 4. For what it does, it's excellent. As an additional cost to play, you have to discard 1 Blastforge card from your hand, but that's okay because most of the deck is Blastforge cards. And you target 1 Blastforge Dwarf warrior in your discard pile, and the key thing here is it does not revive, it conscripts. Now that really matters when we get into the Blastforge, because it really triggers off of conscription of Blastforge warriors. So then it also allows you to conscript an additional Blastforge warrior from your hand this turn. This is a really, really powerful card when you utilize it in tandem with your Into the Blastforge. So this is the card we've been referring to, and now you only run it at 2. It comes at 2 in the 2-player starter set, just like 3 of Diary of the Blastforge come in the 2-player starter set. So all of it's really readily available for everybody, and this is extremely good budget build. So this is each time a Blastforge Dwarf Warrior is conscripted to your side of the field. So anytime these guys come into play, especially off of this conscription from the discard pile, you look at the top card of your deck. And if it's a Blastforge Dwarf Warrior, you get to conscript it to your side of the field. If it's any other card that revealed, it does have to go to the discard pile, but that's okay because a lot of your Dwarf cards, you can really benefit from the discard pile, like your Keltor's Explosive Kit. Or anything you can't benefit, you can just add back with that Sterala's Retrieve ability. Next, we play a one of the Nisty's Warcleaver. Now, this comes in the 2-player starter set, it comes at 3 in that. And realistically, you probably sideboard the other 2 of these, but you only run 1 in the deck because dwarves need a little bit of extra negation, but the life cost on this is pretty steep. When your opponent activates a fortified card, you can target the fortified card, negate it, and destroy the targeted card. That's a cost of 6. But you also then, if you do the first effect, you get to pay 6 again if you wish, to destroy an additional card on the field. So like this can just help you push through when your opponent has that pesky fortified that's trying to stop you from doing things. Now crucially, it's not a Blastforge card, so that's one other reason why I've only played at 1. Speaking of Blastforge unified cards, we got to work on here is the Blastforge Melt Cannon. Now this is a rare in the set, but it's a pretty easy rare to obtain. Right now, especially because there's maybe not a lot of Dwarf players currently, but this might change that. So Blastforge Melt Cannon, it can only be equipped to a Blastforge Dwarf Warrior, and you get to bestow +6 to the equipped warrior. So if this card is in your discard pile, you can eradicate it and target 1 card on the field to destroy it. So this just destroys a card when it's in the discard pile, so if you end up sending it to the top of from the top of the deck to the discard pile into the Blastforge, it's still valuable in your discard pile. But also it's just a straight +6 to a guy. Now, keep in mind, The last line of text here, it says, at the end of the turn this card was equipped, destroy the equipped warrior. So you want to make sure that you use this in a situation where you don't mind losing a guy, just to push that extra damage. So typically you don't want to put this on your big 5 power guy, but you might want to put it on your 1 power guy to really try and tip the scales and get over something big. And then even if it dies at the end of the turn, it's not a big deal because this is going to help blow up another card. So next, we move on to the fortified card. So as you can see, not a very big unified lineup in this deck. We want to make sure we focus on our Blastforge guys to really trigger that into the Blastforge effects. But also, we want to get our fortifieds because we want to stop our opponent from playing cards, just like we said before. So yes, this seems more like a control deck, but really it's just tempo strategy. So next we have our Blastforge Blast Shield. So to activate this card when a target player declares an attack with a warrior that the attack of 4 or more. So a lot of people are playing 1 power warriors. You're probably thinking to yourself, why would this be useful? But a lot of those 1 power warriors are often going to get buffed. When you play against heroes, they put equipments on things. When you play against mythical beasts, they increase their field based on how many Phoenix hatchlings they have. If you're playing against demons and they stole some of your big guys, this would be valuable because it puts it back in your hand. So, but this returns all warriors on your opponent's side of the field that have 4 or more attack. So this is great also against Titans that like to play a lot of really big power guys, or Orcs like we showed earlier that like to really power their guys up to do damage. And this is free, which is also awesome because Quartzheart only has 70 health and we're already paying a lot to activate some of these other effects. If you return 2 or more warriors to the hand by this effect, you also get to deal 4 damage to your opponent's warlord. So that's a really sneaky line of text there that you want to make sure you pay attention to, because if you're playing against a Titan player that has put themselves really low to try and make their board really big to push for damage, you return all the hand and then you just can take 4 damage off their opponent's warlord. And honestly, that might be enough to just really tip the scales in your favor if they've already paid a lot of their life, much like Orcs like to do as well. So then we move on to Rodoka's Prayer Gauntlet. So this is a fortified that also comes in the 2-player starter set. It comes in as a 3 of, but we only run it as 2 in the deck. And quite simply, mainly because it's not a Blastforge card, so we can't search for it. And ultimately, it doesn't stop your opponent from doing things. It just helps you when you're really playing out of the tank or playing from behind. So you have a Bloodborne cost of 2, so not a lot, which is also beneficial. And you can only activate it when your Dwarf Warlord is being attacked directly. So it's really, like I said, when you don't have that front line of your mass amount of Blastforge warriors, this has helped you get out of that situation. You look at the top 3 cards of your deck, which, you know, if you're sculpting your deck properly, you know what's already there. And you reveal any number of Dwarf Warriors from among them, conscript them to your side of the field, which is awesome because the keyword is conscripts them, which really helps trigger you into Blastforge if it's there. And it just lets you keep putting guys off the top of your deck into play, providing you keep hitting your Blastforge warriors. But you should, because like I said, you're sculpting the top of your deck. And then if it's not a Blastforge warriors that are revealed, you can just add those cards to your hand. So in worst situation, you don't reveal any warriors, you just draw 3 cards. Next, we move on to an uncommon from Ravaged Lands. This is Journey Through Glacier Pass. Now, this might be an argumentative card of whether to play it, whether not to play it, but in a meta where you're probably going to see a lot of aggressive decks, much like Orcs and Titan, this is a really, really powerful card in against the aggro matchups. Because this card here, you can only activate it if you control only 1 Dwarf Warrior on your side of the field, but the target player, you target 1 player, and they can only attack with 1 of their warriors this turn. So this is an amazing ability when you are in a situation where maybe you didn't flip very well off of your Into the Blastforge, or they've cleared most of your guys, and before your last guy dies, you sneak in with a Journey Through Glacier Pass. And really solidify yourself for making sure that you don't take any extra damage to Quartzheart that you don't need. So then, we move on to 3 Shattered on the Frozen Anvil. So this cost of this card is extremely to play it, not a cost for it. This is a budget build. This is an uncommon in Ravaged Lands, easy to get. But the cost to activate this card in the game is extremely expensive. As a Bloodborne 10, which is steep off of Quartzheart's life, but also it sends the top 2 cards of your deck to the discard pile. So all that sculpting you've been doing, this is kind of counterintuitive, but this card is incredibly great to activate when you're in a situation where you need to recover, or just to Maybe you have a board that's full and your opponent goes to do something big to try and clear that board. You activate this. So you target a player and return all warriors on that target player's side of their field to their hand. So yes, this is doesn't target, and it returns, it bounces everything back. All 5 guys on your opponent's side of the field go back to the hand. Doesn't matter about their attack power like Blast Shield does, and it doesn't require your opponent to attack. It's just straight up bounce up to 5 guys. And then you get to draw 1 card for each warrior returned to the player's hand by this effect. Now, you don't get to draw if you return a token, but if you return a field of 5 guys, this is a pay 5, send the top, or pay 10, send the top 2 cards of your deck to the discard pile. You can bounce 5 and draw 5. Now that's best case scenario, but either way, this is just auto include in the deck. And we run it as a 3 of, despite not maybe really activating all 3 in a game, because that's 30 life off of Quartz Art, but we run 3 of because we want to see it. And we want to make sure that we have this in our back pocket when we really need to push. Next, we move on to Never Shake the Cold. So, once again, a common from Ravaged Lands. So as you can see, I think the only rare we actually have in this deck is the Metal Cannon. This common card from Ravaged Lands, Never Shake the Cold, is another way that Dwarves can just stop your opponent from playing cards. It's not a Blastforge card, but if it did, that'd be really strong. But ultimately, it has a consume 10, so off of Rayleigh's AP of 50, you consume 10, and you can negate the activation of 1 unified card on the field and destroy it. So it's just an easy way of just stopping your opponent from making a power move. And then all opposing players then draw 1 card. So yes, you negate one of the things they do, but then they get to draw a card. But ultimately, if you're negating something that's going to potentially win them the game, that extra card means nothing because you just stop them from winning, and it might be just enough to tip the scales for you to win on your turn. Then we move on to, speaking of negation, we move on to those 3 pesky deflects that you get in your 2-player starter set. Now this only comes as a 1-of in the 2-player starter set, but for this build we need to have 3. And at the cost to discard 1 card from your hand, but you can negate the activation of a unified card on the field and destroy it. So this is once again another way of just stopping your opponent from doing big things when you're really trying to solidify not only keeping your guys alive, but also just trying to stop your opponent from going back at you, because like I said, you're paying a lot of life in this deck, and there's no life heal in Dwarfs. So you really want to make sure that every life you pay for Quartz Art is the only damage you're taking in the game and not from an opponent. And lastly, the 1 power card in the deck that helps you really get an advantage when you're trying to push for big games. And that's Blastforge Armory. So this is an uncommon in Ravaged Lands, but it's a fortified. So you're thinking, well, if you're trying to push for damage and this is a fortified, you can't activate it on your turn, but that's okay, because you activate it on your opponent's turn, and once per turn you can pay 10. So steep. That's why we only run it as a 1, and it's a Blastforge, so we can search for it. You target X Blastforge cards in your discard pile, shuffle the targeted cards back into the deck. So as you can see, we have a lot of Blastforge cards in this deck, and so we shuffle back as many as we have in there, and your Into the Blastforge has sent stuff there if it wasn't a Blastforge warrior, right? So it automatically just keeps fueling this card. And you send those back. And then if you do, you bestow plus X attack to all Dwarf warriors on your side of the field, where X was the amount of Blastforge cards you shuffle back. So say you pay 10 life and you shuffle 10 Blastforge cards back, then your whole board, all guys on your side of the field, all Dwarfs, even your Frost Wolves if you had to have them there, all gain plus 10 attack, which is huge because that's a permanent buff. And those are things that are going to really help you change the game. And this might be a big momentum swing, because then your opponent can't kill your guys because they're big all of a sudden, and then now they're still big available on your turn to really, really push for that game. And ultimately, that is the Dwarf deck. I believe we have it as a 50-card build. And that's because we're a tempo-based strategy, and we really want to make sure that we get the pieces we need. Because Quartz Art can sculpt the top of your deck, and he doesn't have a lot of health to play with. But ultimately, this is your kingpin piece. This Into the Blastforge is so effective to make sure this whole deck runs, because you can flip multiple guys into play, have Gust, have Retrieve, be able to get the things back, set up your field exactly the way you want it to. And with that, this is the main basic of the Dwarf deck. We won't go into the side deck, but we're just going to make sure that show you that this is a competitive version of build that's in a budget world. And honestly, if you do want to upgrade this deck, the first and foremost upgrade is 3 commons from Ravage Lands in Stoker Frost. But more importantly is your Kindle Haas, which is your Exalted. It's not a necessity in this deck, but conveniently he is a Blastforge Dwarf Warrior, so he really fits into the Blastforge strategy. But this deck is very competitive even without Kindle Haas. So with that, that's the end of the Dwarf deck.